Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. It's one of society's cliches that every journalist and every teacher has 3 chapters of an unfinished novel in their desk drawer. Well, our guest today has inverted that cliche. Clayvon Harris got good grades in private Catholic school she attended, got a degree in English Lit from Swarthmore College, worked in corporate America, went back to school, got a master's in cinema television from University of Southern California, and was a successful screenwriter, working on such shows as Living Single, Farscape, and Star Trek Voyager. She ultimately burned out in what she called the feast or famine of Hollywood, decided to move back to her hometown of Philadelphia to take up teaching. To ease into the profession, she started as a substitute. Some of the conditions and practices in poorer neighborhoods were shocking, and many of them appear in her compelling account titled SUB, Inside the Notorious School District of Philadelphia. We're very pleased to welcome Clayvon Harris.
Hi, Roger. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
You know, I'd like to begin with something we usually say to folks in the military. Thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, the reason I say that is your subtitle calls the schools of Philadelphia notorious. They're understaffed, housed in aging buildings filled with lead paint and asbestos. They're short on supplies and prone to violence and disruption. I was absolutely shocked to read that in some schools that you taught in, that there was absolutely no way, under any circumstances, that they could bring books home.
Yeah,
How were
yeah.
you going to learn?
I don't know. I found that to be shocking as well. And
Mhm.
I have to say that I subbed twice. When I first came home, I subbed for a year, and that was 2001 to 2002. And then again in 2017 to 2019, I also went out and subbed.
Mhm.
And between those 2 times, I subbed at 67 different schools, and I had probably over 90 assignments. And one of the things I found is that the first time out, the lack of resources was astonishing. No books, couldn't take the books home, no technology in the classrooms or very limited technology that the kids would have access to. That had actually changed by the time I got back out in 2017, 2019. So there were definitely more books that they could take home. The technology was sort of, in some schools they had plenty of access to laptops and, maybe even had their own laptop that they used every day. In other schools, they shared laptops, and some classrooms didn't have them at all. Some had smart boards that worked, others didn't have a working smart board. So it's kind of inconsistent throughout the district.
Mhm. But I think the primary problem is I get from you journaled yourself, I'm sure, during all of this because you've got some really detailed, well-written pieces that put us, the readers, right smack beside you in the classroom, shaking our heads over this disruptions.
Yeah. Um, to be honest, I think that was the thing that shocked me the most is just the level of daily disruption in the classrooms. And that was in practically every classroom that I worked in. And it was usually just a few of the kids, not all of them. They'll try a substitute teacher. Kids will try a substitute
Oh,
teacher.
sure, yeah.
That's a given. But if you stand your ground and you know what you're doing, and after a while, I did actually know what I was doing. You can chill out most of the kids and you can get to work. But there would always be one or two kids that no matter what I did, I could not manage them. And
Mhm.
those kids would fight with the other students. They would challenge me. They would challenge the aides in the classroom. They would sometimes resort to violence, walk in and out of classrooms, fall on the floor and cry. And there was very little help forthcoming from the schools because
Mhm.
they didn't have the resources or the personnel to address this, what was happening all over the school. So it was pretty shocking and pretty difficult.
Right. It's interesting too to watch how your attitude changed over the years as your experience grew. You write that oh, by the way, I did talk a little bit about the structure, but I'll get back to this. But the book is divided into parts, and the first part is you list 15 of the schools that you taught during the first go around, which you identify by PS numbers rather than the individual
By
names, which
name.
I think is
Yeah.
very discreet of you and probably very helpful. And then you have update on those schools, and then you come back and talk about your second go around and the changes in it. So, the point that I was getting to is that you write that at PS2, I put one kid out and felt guilty about it the rest of the day. Then later, you didn't feel that way about it when you had to.
No, after a while, this is how I felt. And to be honest, early on, I really didn't understand what was going on with these, this small group of kids that I would find in almost every classroom, that I didn't think it was fair to the rest of the kids who, by and large, wanted to learn, wanted to participate. They were engaged. And, I didn't think it was fair that there would be one or two kids who kept messing the day up or disrupting the day so that we couldn't get to the learning that we needed to get to. And that went on and on. And this would be day in and day out, week after week, and month after month. And then at the end of the year, those kids would advance together to the next grade and it would start all over again. So, just watching that and just seeing how it played out, I thought this is unfair. By the time these kids get to middle school, they're behind. By the time they get to high school, for some of them, it's too late to catch up.
Yeah.
And I felt bad about putting the kids out at first, thinking, oh, it's not fair, blah, blah, blah. And then I got to a point where I felt like, look, I'm going to teach the kids that are paying attention and engaged and want to learn. But what I didn't understand is that the kids who were causing the majority of disruption, and I eventually learned this, is that they were struggling with disabilities. They were struggling with emotional and behavioral disabilities and some learning disabilities that sort of prevented them from being able to be successful in the general education setting. They needed a different type of setting. They needed different support, but they weren't getting it because there's a federal law that says that all children with disabilities are to be educated in the general education setting. And that's regardless of whether another setting is better for them. It's regardless of whether they have, whether they're disruptive to themselves and to the other kids and to the teacher. That's where they're supposed to be educated, and they're supposed to get support to help them in that setting. But for some of them, they're not getting that support because the schools can't afford it, and they don't have the personnel to disperse all over the school to help kids in all these different individual classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kids they're struggling, they're under this burden that they're kids, they don't understand what's happening or why they're not behaving like the other kids. And they're acting out. They're not able to keep up socially, emotionally, and sometimes academically. So, they fight, they disrupt, they do whatever to kind of distract from the fact that they're struggling.
The whole concept of mainstreaming was based as a way to, well, to save money for one thing, that they didn't have to provide whole separate schools, and theoretically provide more equitable opportunities for those folks. But they end up depriving a vast majority of people of the opportunity. And you have come around to that way of thinking it. This is not right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's very well said. Um, I mean, that's it in the nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unfair. It's unfair to all of the kids. How are you expecting kids to be successful when they're not even in the setting that can help them be the most successful? And how can you expect kids to be successful when there's constant disruption in their class? How much of their education are they losing out on a daily basis? Is it 20%? Is it 30%? And this is also having an impact on the teachers. I ran into a whole lot of very experienced, very dedicated teachers who were working extremely hard to provide a good education to their students, but who were also really struggling and frustrated with having to try to manage some of these students in that environment, because that's not what they went to school to study, and they're not trained to do it. And it was hard.
It's interesting because you mentioned at one point having done some summer work or sort of helped out at some classrooms before you decided this whole thing, and it was all very easy and good. And then you got to this situation, nothing like what you had thought it was going to be.
Not at all. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to work in a summer program called Adventures in Science and Math,
Hmm.
and or Math and Science, because it was called AIMS.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. It was at Swarthmore. We had great teachers. We had, students who were very smart, very bright, but who weren't living up to their potential. And in that setting, they were all very jazzed and excited. And when they were struggling with the environment, we did have a couple of students that struggled with the environment and were kind of disruptive. They were asked to leave the program.
Hmm.
So that was my experience with teaching. I did that program 2 summers in a row, and almost switched my major to education, thinking that I should be a teacher, but I had already started down the path to be a writer, and I decided to keep going with that. And then when I got to a point where the writing thing was getting to be frustrating and I felt like I wasn't being as productive as I should be, and I thought, well, maybe if I go back and teach, I will feel more fulfillment, and
Hmm.
I'll be giving back. I'll be making a contribution. And but what I found out in the schools was just absolutely shocking, and it's not just shocking because, oh, it's violent, oh, the kids are difficult to teach, the kids aren't smart. No, it's not that. Because by and large, the vast majority of the kids I met were wonderful. They were bright, they were engaged, they liked school, they wanted to be there, but then you had this other part that they had to deal with, which became a struggle for them. And the earlier that starts, where you have the kids in the classroom who are struggling and acting out, and this is going on week after week and month after month, it starts to impact the other children. And either they start to follow suit, or they become sort of anxious about what school is going to be like on a day-to-day basis because they're being targeted, or they're just in a classroom where they don't know what's going to happen from day to day.
Yeah. That is frightening and upsetting. I noticed one of the things I really like about it is after each of the schools on the first go around, you put the scores or the percentages of the children in, I think it was eighth grade, that were below competency levels in math and reading. And it's shocking. Some of those numbers, 80, 90% sometimes in
Yeah,
that.
that was one of yeah, that was definitely one of the things that caught my attention when I first started subbing. The very first year, um, the school district had just been taken over by the state of Pennsylvania for because they weren't achieving well. And then the scores came out, the standardized scores for the different grades, and they reported them in the newspaper, for third, fifth, and eighth grade, I believe.
Mhm.
And so I was like, well, let me check the schools where I've been subbing, and I checked, and the majority of the schools where I had been subbing, the scores were just as you said, 80% of the kids achieving below basic level, 85%, 90% of the kids achieving below basic. And I thought, well, this is insane. So I started watching it. I would watch for that newspaper article to come out every year. It was called Report Card on the Schools by the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Mhm.
And then when they stopped doing it, I actually started going to the Department of Education website and just looking up the scores myself. And I kind of confirmed all the ones from before, and then looked at the new ones and kept track of them up through, I think, 2019, for at least the first 15 schools where I subbed. And
Mhm.
even though they've been getting better, they're still not moving as quickly as they should be. And it's not, we're not seeing a drastic improvement. We're seeing small steps.
Yeah. And again, a great deal of that is, well, one is money, obviously. If
Yeah.
if you if teaching in a rundown school with flaking paint and falling plaster and all that stuff, it's a detriment. But also there's a culture. I mean, if you would take the majority of the kids that you dealt with and put them in a place where there were no disruptions, you'd have
Yeah.
a fantastic student body.
You
But
would.
they come into a school where the disruption is the norm, and they have to adjust to that, and some of them don't.
Yeah. And kids are not stupid. People think, oh, they're kids, they don't know anything. No, they're actually really bright. And if they're in a classroom where you have one or two kids who act out all the time and they always get the attention, they always have the teacher coming over to them, trying to calm them down, trying to get them to work, trying to get them to sit down, trying to get them to stay in the classroom, those other kids feel neglected. And so either they start to do something similar because they want that attention as well, or because they don't want to be targeted by those kids.
Yeah.
I had an incident where there was this one classroom, this one school, and this one class that I went back and back again. And this wasn't the second time I went out. So
Yeah.
over a year, I went to that classroom. The first time I went, I was supposed to be there for 4 days. I was there for 2 months. The and then the teacher came back and I went away. And then I would get called to come in a day here or a couple days there for her when she would go out. And then she went out again and I was back for 3 months. And then she finally came back again and then she went out again. So I was back again at the end of the year to close out the school year.
Yeah.
And I just saw the way one student in that classroom, one, impacted all of the other students. When it started out, I had a couple of kids who were just a little out of control, but I would call their mother or grandparent or uncle or whoever every day after school. Sometimes during class, hey, so and so is not behaving. Did you talk to him? Did you talk to her? And eventually they kind of calmed down. But this one child, nothing I did mattered. And I would communicate with his family every day. Every day. They would text me every day. How did he do today?
Yeah.
How is it going?
That was X you're talking about
Yes,
there.
that's
Yes.
I called him Student X.
That's right. And then again, you didn't identify anybody by their actual names, which I think was appropriate. I'm curious if you ever found out what happened to some of the kids in your first go rounds. Did you ever do any follow up on that?
No, I never did.
Yeah.
I think there was like too much time had passed
Sure.
between that first group of kids and the second. Every now and again, for one of the schools, the one where I went back and back again, I
Mm-hmm.
will call up a teacher that still works there and say, how are the kids doing? How are they doing now? I went back a year later to check on them. And, it was kind of the same, to be honest. Once again, how I wound up being there is that they had a classroom that had a new teacher who was, she was new and she was struggling with the class. And, there was a pack of boys in her class that would go and roam the halls and just walk out whenever they wanted. And she would let them because then they weren't in the classroom causing a whole lot of disruption and chaos. And she was struggling and they decided to split her class and bring in another teacher. But before the other teacher arrived, that teacher went out on medical leave. And when the new teacher got there, she got that entire class, which had been completely out of control, and she couldn't do anything with them. And then she went back out on medical. She went out on medical leave as well. And so they wound up splitting the class and giving it to two substitute teachers, and I was one of them.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle. It was a big struggle, but I did fall in love with those kids. I thought they were absolutely amazing, which is why I kept going back because I wanted to be a bridge for them, and help until they got to their next year when I hoped they would have a more stable um, teaching situation. But the next year, same thing happened. They had one of their teachers just couldn't deal, or something happened, and they wound up getting a substitute teacher. And I went in and I spoke with him, and it was toward the end of that next year. And he was just he was fed up to hear. And he was just struggling and frustrated and ready for the year to be over. And one of the things he was most upset about was student X. He was
Uh-huh.
still struggling with that same child.
Yeah. That is so so tough indeed. I also wanted to ask something in between those two 15 years apart. What were you up to?
I actually worked in corporate America. I did my first year as a substitute teacher. It was extraordinarily hard.
Yes.
And I thought, you know what, this is not for me. I, I cannot do it. I quit.
Hmm.
Um, and I went back to corporate America. I worked in marketing communications as a copywriter, and kind of worked my way up the ladder. Wound up at an agency, an advertising agency, where I ran the copy department, which is what we call the writing department, and worked at another agency, et cetera. And then I got to a point where I was sort of at a crossroads, trying to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I thought, I need to go back and finish that book, because what happened is I started keeping a journal the first time out when I was subbing, to just kind of help me process what I was seeing on a daily basis. And I thought about writing an article, and I gave it to a friend of mine, and he said, "No, I think this is a book. You should keep subbing and keep writing." And I did keep subbing, and I did keep the journal, but I didn't finish the book. I started it, I never finished it, but I always felt like I should have.
Mhm.
And I thought at this point, when I had this time to decide what I was going to do next, I thought, well, maybe I need to go back and finish that book. And then as I went back to try to finish it, I realized so much time had gone by. Maybe things were different. Maybe the situation was fixed, and there was no need for this book, which is honestly what I was hoping.
Yeah.
And one of my friends, who's a sociologist, said, "Yeah, you need to go back out there and see what's going on." And I did not want to go back out there, but I did, because I really wanted to know. I wanted to know if things had changed. And so that's how I wound up subbing again, and then getting involved with some of the classes that I had, where I would be on an assignment much longer than I intended to be there,
Hmm.
because I liked the kids so much, and
Yeah.
they needed me, and I didn't want to abandon them.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to touch on. One is the myth that the parents don't care is not true.
No, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. I have two thoughts on that. First, I spoke to many, many parents, many parents. And with a lot of them, once they found out that I was open to speaking with them, they would reach out to me.
Hmm.
Even student X, his parents and his grandparents had my phone number, would text me, would call me, "How's he doing? What's going on?" I worked on his homework with him, and I hope he's okay. But a lot, a lot of the parents were happy to hear from me. They wanted to know, "Oh, wait, they had homework?" I was like, "Yeah, I give homework every day. I give homework Monday through Friday, because that's how it worked for me. So I give homework Monday through Friday. So if they tell you they don't have homework, they're not telling you the truth." So, once parents found that out, they would get on the kids and make sure they did their homework. Some kids still didn't do their homework, but
Yeah.
the majority of them did. And the majority of parents were really happy to speak to me, and were interested to know how their kids were doing. So it was rare that I would run into a parent who just didn't care, or that I couldn't reach.
Hmm.
For me, that was my experience.
Yeah. What what ideas have you come up with for solutions? I'm sure that the legislature would be love to hear from you.
Yeah, what does this little substitute teacher think about what we should do about education? But to be honest, I really think, there are two things that need to be done. One, education funding needs to be fair throughout the United States, for all school districts, regardless of whether that school district is a wealthy school district, or if it's a majority white school district. The funding should be equitable.
Yes.
So, and over 50% of the states have been sued and court ordered to make their funding to all of their school districts equitable. And Pennsylvania is in the process of a lawsuit right now. So we're hoping that this summer there will be a decision, and that things will change, because right now in Pennsylvania, school districts that have higher numbers of students of color receive over $2,000 less per student per year. So if you have a school district like the school district of Philadelphia with 196,000 students, or somewhere around there now, it
Yeah.
changes, goes up, it goes down, that's times 2,000, which is what, a little less than $400 million a year that they're being underfunded, and have been underfunded
Yeah.
for decades. So that's
Right.
that's insane. How do you expect them to be able to function? How do you expect them to be able to educate the students, and pay for good teachers, and clean up the environment, and make sure that there's heat in the wintertime, and make sure that there's extermination for rodents? And I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah. It is indeed.
That's can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that I would hope that the legislatures would revisit the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act,
Hmm.
and take a look at one, the reasons why students with disabilities can be removed from the general education setting. Because the last time I checked, they had revised it in 2004 and they added doing serious bodily injury to bringing in drugs, guns, or a bomb. And to me, those are all way too extreme and it's way too far down the line
Right.
to take a child out of a classroom who's, clearly having issues. Because I don't think you jump straight to bringing in, weapons or doing serious bodily
Right.
injury. Catch them earlier while they're smaller and you can do more good in terms of helping them.
Right.
So I think that, and giving the school districts a little more authority in terms of deciding which of their students do actually benefit from being in the general education setting that have disabilities, because some kids do great.
Mm-hmm.
They flourish, they
Right.
can keep up, they're at the top of their class, it's great. But some of them don't, and those kids shouldn't be in that setting because it's not fair to them and it's not fair to their classmates.
Right. Indeed. So, what's next for you?
Right now, I am, one of my friends said, "Oh, this book is," she didn't say this book is long. She said, it'd be great if you would put together some type of a workbook or summary, um, so that, to help people know what they can do to help
Mm.
out with this situation. And I thought, oh goodness, that's just more work. But I'm actually in the process of working on that, and
Right.
I'm going to get this workbook together, and I'm going to make it available on the Angel Walk website as a free download. And I'm hoping to get that up, by sometime in June, maybe.
All right.
But it's everything takes longer than I think it does. But that's
Mm-hmm.
the goal. So right now I'm working on that. I've been um, doing some posting on Facebook, just trying to get the word out. I've been doing some interviews like this one, which is a great way to get the word out about the book. And that's what I'm doing right now. And after a little while, I guess I'll have to stop because I've been working on this for a very long time and figure out what I'm going to do once again with the rest of my life. So
That is amazing. We have been very generous with your time today. Let's mention websites, blogs, anything along that line.
um, you can find out more information about SUB, the Notorious School District of Philadelphia, on angelwalk.biz. There's a sample chapter. There's, information about me, information about the book, where you can find it. You can find it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Walmart.com, Apple iBooks. It's available in paperback, hardback, and ebooks. You can also find the Facebook page at, it's very long, SUB, Inside the Notorious School District of Philadelphia on Facebook. And yeah, it might take a little bit, of Googling, but it's not too hard to find.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us. Don't go away, though. I want to talk to you a second.
Thank you so much, Roger.
Okay.